On the 14th of March 2021, I picked up this sick greater sand plover off the beach in Miri, Sarawak in northern Borneo. It couldn't stand or fly, couldn't actually even hold its head up. It was extremely weak. Greater sand plovers are a species of shorebird which are fairly common on migration in Southeast Asia. They're brown above, white below in the winter, but in the breeding season they develop this wonderful black mask and a rich russet coloured breast band and crown. They spend their winter time in Australia, New Zealand, parts of Southeast Asia, and then they breed in Western China and Mongolia, southern Siberia, and the Altai Mountains. The day after I picked up the bird, it was extremely weak, as you can see from this video. It weighed 63 grams, which is pretty much at the lowest end of the weight range for these birds. And it really didn't seem to have any muscle tone at all. It had lost the use of its limbs, basically, and it remained. I fed it. I force fed it a diet of mealworms and a few drops of water, and just used a towel to support its head and to keep it as comfortable as I could. But I really, at this point, didn't think it was going to survive. At this point, I still didn't know what was wrong with the bird. Clearly we needed to get it checked out for avian influenza, but the suspicion was that it had something that's known as capture myopathy, which results in the loss of muscle mass in the legs and wings, and it sometimes happens when birds are extremely stressed in hot weather. This is day 4, March the 17th. I created a kind of sling for it so that it could extend its legs rather than having them flexed beneath the body to try to improve the blood circulation in the legs. It still wasn't able to stand, but at least using this contraption, it could, if it chose to, bear some weight on its legs. And you can see that by now it's beginning to be able to hold its head up for a few seconds, and then it would rest its bill on the edge of the sling that I provided. I'd also made contact with Sarawak Forestry Corporation and the Department of Veterinary Services in Miri, and arranged to go to get the bird tested for avian influenza. And that was going to happen the next day. Day 5 was D-Day, a visit to the Department of Veterinary Services in Miri, where Dr. Silmi was on hand to test the bird for avian influenza. I also met there Mr. Remley from the Sarawak Forestry Corporation. Because the greater sand plover is a fully protected species in Sarawak, I would normally need to hand over this bird to the officer. In this case, an exception was made because of my knowledge of this group of birds, but the understanding was if the bird tested positive for AI, it would be euthanized. This photograph here shows the test result, which came back negative, so I was able to bring the bird home again. Day 6 was another important day, the day when the bird first stood on its feet again. It was able to stand stationary in the morning. By the afternoon it was able to take a few tottering steps, rather stiff-legged and a little unsteady, but it began to visibly grow in strength from this moment. It still wasn't feeding itself, but it was at least now beginning to preen and to clean itself off because it had become quite soiled from sitting. Day 9, and the bird was much more mobile, but in its attempts to fly and sometimes run, it would get itself into trouble. So this was quite a difficult time when it was somewhat mobile, but yet needed to be carefully monitored to make sure it didn't get itself into difficulties. I was still force feeding the bird. It didn't start feeding. I gave it plenty of opportunity to feed itself naturally over several days, and it didn't, so I decided to make the decision in order to build up the weight and to give it a chance to regenerate muscle. I made the decision to force feed it, or to continue force feeding it, and so I fed it every 3 hours or so from about 6:30 in the morning till 10 at night, giving it, weighing it before and after the meal, and giving it 2 to 3 grams of mealworms each time. So generally it gained weight at around 1 gram a day. Since we moved into this house last August, we've slowly been converting part of our front garden into a vegetable patch. with netting around it, and it just so happened that this was a perfect place to convert into a sort of exercise yard for the bird as it gained its strength. I dug a shallow pool, or at least a shallow hole, and then lined it with plastic so that I could create a shallow pool where if it wanted to it could bathe, and that was something that was very much to its liking. And we noticed that after it bathed and preened, it actually now was starting to try to exercise its wings. It wasn't yet able to lift itself up off the ground, but every day we could see that the wings were gradually getting stronger, which was a great sign. Day 14, the bird was now weighing around 70 grams, and we realized that it was going to be hard for us to know when it was ready to go because we weren't going to be able to see it in open flight. So we were going to have to make some sort of estimate as to whether it was capable of flight just by looking at the way it was using its wings in a somewhat restricted environment. The other factor was that the stronger and healthier the bird became, the more stress it was experiencing as I was handling it and feeding it. And so I had to consider the offsetting effect of the stress caused to the bird versus giving it more time to gain strength and flight ability. So this was day 14, and I made the decision that the bird was ready to go, and that it would go on day 15, which is 29th of March, the following morning. So this is the moment. Pretty magical to watch it as it kind of realized it was no longer constrained by any walls or fences, and
I think I did.
it was particularly gratifying to see it eventually take flight. Although the flight wasn't particularly long, it did fly several times while I watched it getting further and further away from me, and later on I was able to catch up with it again. I was surprised that it was quite easy to recognize among the other greater sand plovers because of its mannerisms that I'd grown to become very familiar with in the 2 weeks that it was in captivity. This is where it took its first flight. Not great camera work, probably not great flight either, but I figured the only way it's going to get better at flying is by flying, so that's something I couldn't really provide for it while it was in captivity. It's probably unlikely that this bird will complete the migration this year, and that may have been true even if the bird had been in full health. Often birds in their first calendar year after hatching don't complete the full migration back to the breeding grounds in their first summer. So it may be that this bird, if it survives, will hang around in Miri until the autumn migration, when the birds return at the end in September or so this year. Will it survive? Well, nature is red in tooth and claw, but I feel like at least now it has a fighting chance, which it certainly didn't have when I picked it up. So I feel like it's been a good experience. I feel like I've done as much as I can do for the bird, and let's hope it survives many more years and produces offspring. That's it. Thanks for watching.